Welcome to your video on how to common factor. Last day we started solving quadratic equations by using isolation, but there are some quadratic equations that cannot be solved using isolations. The only ones that can are quadratic equations like this, ax squared plus c equals 0, which means they're in standard form. And there's no linear term, which means there's no x term. There's an x squared and there's constant, but there's no x term. The other type is when you are in vertex form. So those are the only times that you can use isolation to solve quadratic equations. If you have a standard form equation that has a linear term like this, because there is an x squared and an x term, in order to solve these equations, you need to learn how to factor. And we're going to start with common factoring. Common factoring is just the reverse of the distributive law. So remember, the distributive law is when you take what is outside and multiply it by what is inside. So negative 2x times 3x is negative 6x squared. Negative 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. Going from this as the question to this as the answer is what we call simplifying. So there's different ways to simplify. Simplify could be using the distributive law. Simplify could be using FOIL. Going from this as the question to this as the answer is factoring. And there are also different types of factoring. We're going to start with what is called common factoring. And with common factoring, you have a monomial on the outside and a polynomial on the inside of brackets. So you're going to have a monomial on the outside, and then on the inside, you're going to have a polynomial. So in order to common factor, the first thing you need to do is to determine the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is called the GCF. So the greatest common factor is made up of two parts. The first part is the biggest number that will divide into both coefficients. So the biggest number that can divide into 12 and 18 is 6. The second part is you have to see if both terms have the same variable. They do. They both have an x. But this has 5 x's and this one only has 3 x's. So that means you can only take 3 x's out of both terms. So what you're going to do is take the common variable with the lower exponent. So in that case, with the 6, they both have an x, but the lowest exponent is 3. The next thing you're going to do is to divide the polynomial by the greatest common factor, and that gives you the quotient. So to divide, what you want to remember is that you divide coefficients and subtract exponents. So 12x5 divided by 6x3. 12 divided by 6 is 2. X to the 5 divided by x to the 3 is x squared. 18x cubed divided by 6x cubed. 18 divided by 6 is 3. X cubed divided by x cubed, when you subtract the exponents you get 0, which means there's no x left. The third thing you have to do is write as a product with the greatest common factor on the outside and the quotient on the inside. The quotient becomes the polynomial on the inside, and the greatest common factor becomes the monomial on the outside. So don't just do the dividing, make sure you put the greatest common factor out front. So, once again, what's the difference between factoring and simplifying? Simplifying is using the rules of algebra to remove the brackets and collect like terms. This could be distributive law, FOIL, or anything else. So 3x times 2x is 6x squared. 3x times negative 5 is negative 15x. Factoring is using the rules of algebra to write your expression as a product of two or more factors which are separated by brackets. So in this case, common factoring. Greatest common factor is in the front. Biggest number that can divide into 6 and 15 is 3. They both have an x, but the lowest exponent is 1. So the greatest common factor is 3x. That goes in the front as the monomial. Now we have to divide each of these by 3 to the x. 6x squared divided by 3x is 2x. Negative 15x divided by 3x is negative 5x. So you can see these two are the opposite of each other. Let's try one more together. Negative 16x squared minus 8x. What is the biggest number that divides into 16 and 8? That number is 8. However, please note that if the coefficient of the first term is negative, then the negative should be factored out with the greatest common factor. You will lose marks if it is not. So because that leading coefficient is negative, you have to put the negative with the greatest common factor. Both terms have an x, but the lowest exponent is 1, so there is an x in the greatest common factor. So your final answer has the greatest common factor on the outside, and now divide each of these terms by negative 8x squared. Negative 16x squared divided by negative 8x is 2x. Negative 8x divided by negative 8x is positive 1. So take a few minutes and try examples 1, 2, 3, and 4. As a hint, whenever you have a decimal question, almost always both of these will have a common factor with the coefficient being the first number, negative 4.9. Both of these can be divided by negative 4.9. Both of these can be divided by 0.5. That's only if you have decimals. If you don't have decimals, your greatest common factor will not necessarily be the first number. So press pause, try these 4 examples, and then come back to check your answers. Press pause now, please. Okay, welcome back. So in the first example, greatest common factor is 4x, and then when you divide each of these terms by 4x, that's what goes inside the brackets. For question 2, don't forget the leading term was negative, so you have to pull the negative out. Since all 3 terms did not have an x, there is no x in your greatest common factor. Question 3, both terms could be divided by negative 4.9x. And in 4, both terms could be divided by 0.5x. So if there's anything here that you don't understand, please ask your teacher the next day, and we will do more practice with common factoring. Thank you.